Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about anthologies, big anthologies, real big anthologies, because there's nothing quite like a big ass anthology. So, recently, I've been talking about a TBR shelf I've got over there, where I've been talking about the next science fiction books I'm going to read, the next horror books, the next fantasy books I'm going to read. And in the science fiction video, there was an anthology that I chose for the shelf over there, which is called The Big Book of Science Fiction. And it's really big. It's pretty much the biggest single volume anthology of science fiction you're ever going to see. And I remember looking at that and just thinking, man, this is so cool. I mean, it's going to take me forever to read it, but I really want to read it, so who cares how long it takes? It looks amazing. And there's just something magical to me about anthologies. I love novels, I love longer fiction, but there's something special about short fiction. And there's just something so cool about anthologies, how you could get all these different stories from all these different writers. And when you get anthologies of this size, I mean, they are packed full of all kinds of goodness. And maybe some stuff that isn't so good. But, you got to see. I mean, that's part of the excitement is, what is the next story going to be? And these are not, the anthologies I'm going to talk about today, they're not all in one genre, although a lot of them seem to be horror. I have a weakness for horror. And I've got space over there on my TBR shelf, so I'm going to pack that space with anthologies. These are some anthologies that I am going to read. I don't know when, but these are the next anthologies I'm going to read. And the first one is a horror anthology, and it's from the Library of America, Fancy Pants publisher, Library of America, great publisher who publishes the greatest works of American literature in really nice, high-quality editions. Wonderful publisher. I have a ton of their books. And this is actually a 2-volume set. This is American Fantastic Tales, edited by the late Peter Straub, the author of Ghost Story and so many other really cool horror novels. And he did a really good job editing this set. So it's American Fantastic Tales, because for some reason they didn't want to say American Horror Stories, although that's pretty much what this is, supernatural suspense horror stories. And it's in 2 volumes. And they're each about 700 pages long in these nice little Library of America compact volumes. And the first set is Terror and the Uncanny from the 1940s to now. Kind of a cool cover there. But this is in the standard Library of America format. And it's just a dynamite collection of horror stories. Straub did a really good job choosing the horror stories for this volume, and we get so many authors that you would recognize. I mean, the greatest author of them all, Robert E. Howard, is in this volume with The Black Stone. But we have also got Robert Bloch, Clark Ashton Smith, H.P. Lovecraft, August Derleth, Henry S. Whitehead. Good writer. I'm glad to see him in here. Seabury Quinn is in here. And then you've also got Henry James, Edith Wharton, Ambrose Bierce, F. Marion Crawford, Conrad Aiken. You get a lot in this volume. And like I said, it's 700 pages. And that's just the first volume. You also have Terror and the Uncanny from the 1940s to now. When was this published? When was now? Was this had to be, what, the mid-2000s? This was 2009, actually. So this came out in 2009. So, yeah, from the 1940s to 2009. Great collection. So this one, of course, has some more modern writers like Tim Powers and Gene Wolfe and Joe Hill. is in here. Stephen King, of course. Stephen King is in here. That feeling, you can only say what it is in French. That's the story in here for Stephen King. That feeling, you can only say what it is in French. Jeff Vandermeer has a story in here. Joyce Carol Oates, of course. So these look great. And I could tell right away, just from looking at the contents, that these were worth reading. I just haven't read it yet. A lot of the stories in here, in this set, I have read elsewhere. But I haven't read the anthologies themselves, so definitely going to read this. This is, like I said, just from the contents alone, I can tell it's an excellent set. What else do I have lurking around here? So this one this isn't really that big. This anthology isn't really that big. It's only 600 pages, I think. Yeah, it's only 600 pages, so it's not really that big, but I included it because I do want to put it on the shelf. This is Masterpieces of Terror and the Supernatural, edited by Marvin Kaye, or at least selected by Marvin Kaye. Not to be confused with Great Tales of Terror and the Supernatural, which was a different anthology. This is just Masterpieces of Terror and the Supernatural. Completely different. But Marvin Kaye actually has done quite a few anthologies of this sort. And I have not read this one. And it's got some cool stuff. Carmilla is in here. There's probably 2 or 3 anthologies with Carmilla in it. But we've also got The Transformation by Mary Shelley. Robert Louis Stevenson's in here with The Bottle Imp. And Lovecraft is in here, of course. And a lot of other really cool writers. Tennessee Williams is in here. A lot of people are in here. Fitz James O'Brien, Robert Bloch. Robert Bloch is probably in every single horror anthology that I'll show you. Robert Bloch did so many really great horror stories. The author of Psycho did some great horror stories, a lot of them. So in horror anthologies, you just see him everywhere, as you should. So definitely want to read this, even though this isn't that big. The rest of them, though, they're all pretty large. So this next one I've been intending to get to for a while because I did read the first 2/3 of this, and that is The Dark Descent by David G. Hartwell. And this is considered one of the, if not the, most important horror anthologies ever assembled. It's a magnificent anthology. And the way I originally encountered this was when it was published broken up into 3 separate paperbacks. And I had 2 of the 3 paperbacks that were published. I never did find the last one. This is, if I'm remembering right. I'm pretty sure this was published in 3 different, broken up into 3 different paperbacks. And this was back during the Paperbacks from Hell era. And those mass market paperbacks that I read that were part of this were great. They were great. And so finally I got this 1-volume edition of The Dark Descent. And it is pretty long. It's almost 1,000 pages. It's almost 1,000 pages. Not quite. Almost. And even with that much space, there's still stories that if you go through here, you're like, well, why isn't this story in here? But it's got so many great stories in here. I mean, so many great ones. M.R. James with The Ash Tree. Call of Cthulhu is in here, of course. Carl Edward Wagner's in here with Styx. Robert Aikman is in here with The Swords. Clive Barker's in here with Dread. I mean, just so many cool stories in here. And one of the best, or one of the ones I like the most, is Michael Shea's The Autopsy, which was just made into a episode of a show that's on Netflix, and I can't remember what the show is called. But I did see the episode of The Autopsy, and they did a good job. But the original story is even better. It's fantastic, and this is a great anthology. So yeah, I've been wanting to get to this one, so I'm probably going to stick this one up on the top. However, right under that is going to be its sequel, because it does have a sequel. Because remember I said how you went through this and you're like, well, it's missing this story, and shouldn't this story be in there as well? Well, there was a sequel, and it has all of those stories that you thought were missing from the first volume. This is Foundations of Fear. Also by David G. Hartwell. Foundations of Fear has all of those stories that you missed from the first volume. And this one is really long as well, but not as long as the first one. Actually, it's not as long as I thought it was. It's 660 pages. But you know what? They're great big pages. So it's basically all the stuff that didn't fit into that first volume. Like The Sand Kings by George R.R. Martin. And that should have been in the first one, I think. And Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. Great science fiction story that is also a horror story. This has At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. So many good stories. Probably most importantly, the one story that probably should have been in the first volume, The Dark Descent, for sure, is The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. That was a stunning omission, but it's in here. So if you have both of these, you have like a magnificent epic of short horror that pretty much covers all the bases. So now there's some other stuff that's also really big. And this next one is edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. Anne and Jeff Vandermeer, who edited some dynamite anthologies. They did an anthology called The Weird, which was just a magnificent horror and weird fiction anthology. It was just great. I did read that one. But they also did this one. This is the Time Traveler's Almanac. And this is a big-ass anthology about time travel stories. It's all about time travel, and there's a lot of it in here. This is how many pages? Over 900 pages. So that's a pretty good size anthology. Not double columned as some of those anthologies out there are, but it's still a really good size anthology, packed full of some really great stuff. So the Time Traveler's Almanac. This looks great. And of course, already brags about who's in the volume. On the cover, Ursula K. Le Guin, Douglas Adams, Isaac Asimov, George R.R. Martin, H.G. Wells, of course. So this one looks really cool. I picked this up actually a few years ago, never got to it. Definitely need to get to this because it looks awesome. But speaking of Anne and Jeff Vandermeer and Giant Anthologies, they also did the Big Book of Science Fiction that I was talking about earlier, but they also did this one. This is the Big Book of Classic Fantasy. Now, I believe they also have the Big Book of Modern Fantasy, but I don't have that one. But I do have Classic Fantasy, and it's full of writers like Mary Shelley, Jules Verne, Oscar Wilde, J.R.R. Tolkien, of course. Kafka is in here, as Kafka should be in here. So I'm glad he's included. I mean, it's another one of those big book anthologies that are double columned. You know, we have the massive pages full of double columns, chock full of texts, and so these are double column pages, and it's 790 pages, so it's huge. It's huge, but it looks great. It looks, you know, just as good as the other anthologies that they did. They've got talent in choosing stories. I'll give them that. Next, I have some Otto Penzler anthologies that I haven't read yet. So Otto Penzler does do the bulk of the Black Lizard books, big book volumes, which are the massive anthologies, you know, just like this one. And Otto Penzler did a lot of crime and suspense related ones and like mystery and detective stuff. I've read most of those. But for some reason, and this is really unusual and weird, and I'm not sure why this is, I haven't read the horror-themed ones that Otto Penzler did. And he did do 3 of them. One is the Big Book of Ghost Stories, which is probably the biggest single volume anthology of ghost stories that you'll ever find. Again, it's all double columns, just like that last one that I showed you. It's huge and oversized. This one is how many pages? 900 pages, it looks like. Don't have my glasses on, so I couldn't tell you for sure, but it looks like about 900 pages. And the contents in this is great. And you can always count on Otto Penzler, because nobody knows short fiction like that guy. I mean, that guy, I don't know how he has time to read all of this stuff, but I know he's read all of this stuff. And he always finds just some really interesting stories. E.F. Benson's in here, of course, but also Isaac Asimov is in here. And so there's some stuff you wouldn't expect. I mean, Ramsey Campbell, you'd expect him. Conrad Aiken, of course. David Morrell, the author of Rambo, is in here. Rudyard Kipling, of course. Kipling deserves to be in here. So many great writers. Mark Twain, of course, is in here. There's a lot. Wilkie Collins. I mean, it's just, this is so gigantic that, yeah, everybody's in here. And, I mean, you can, this is an anthology that I imagine I'll be reading for quite some time. And this next one is even bigger than that one was. And this is the Vampire Archives. The Vampire Archives, which I think, if I'm remembering right, is the second big book that Penzler did. Even though it's not called a big book, it's called the Vampire Archives, but it is a big book. It could have been called the Big Book of Vampires. Because again, same format, you know, with the double columns, but you've got this great cover with Christopher Lee hanging out there. And yeah, pretty much everybody you expect is in here. Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, Anne Rice, of course. Anne Rice has to be in here, and she is. Edgar Allan Poe, of course. Sheridan Le Fanu. Carmilla is in this one, of course. Just like in that other one I mentioned, because Carmilla is pretty great. So, you know, that's no surprise. And very influential and important. The Lovecraft story in here is called The Hound. And until I saw it in here, I never really thought of it as a vampire story. But I guess it could qualify. If you know what, I have to read that one again. It's an underrated Lovecraft story, I know that. Ed Gorman is in here. Good old Ed Gorman is in here with Duty. Who else is in here? August Derleth is in here. M.R. James, of course, with Count Magnus. Bram Stoker does make an obligatory appearance in here with Dracula's Guest, which is excellent if you haven't read it. All kinds of cool stuff. Richard Lehman is in here. Got to have Richard Lehman. So the Vampire Archives, and this one is huge as well. Over 1,000 pages, double columned. So yeah, it's big. The Vampire Archives is big. But we can't just have ghosts and vampires. We got to have zombies too. Zombies, zombies, zombies! It's zombies, zombies, zombies. So, again, on this subject, this is probably going to be the largest single one-volume anthology of zombie stories you'll ever find, even though it's not as big as the vampire and ghost volumes. I guess there just aren't as many stories about zombies. Great cover, though. That's just so cool. I was pretty excited to get this. And who's in this one? H.P. Lovecraft is in here a couple of times. Robert Bloch. You know, I told you, Robert Bloch, he's got to be in everything. Kevin J. Anderson's in here. Sheridan Le Fanu is in here with Shulkin the Painter. Henry S. Whitehead. Yeah, Whitehead has to be in here. If you've never read Henry S. Whitehead, you should. I should do a video just on Whitehead. I should do that. Ramsey Campbell's in here again. Theodore Sturgeon's in here with It. Theodore Sturgeon is in here with It. So that's worth this right there. Joe R. Lansdale's in here. Robert E. Howard is in here with Pigeons from Hell. Which, if you've never read Pigeons from Hell is a story with a ridiculous title that doesn't sound like it would be scary at all, but it's scary as hell. And, you know, Robert E. Howard is the greatest pulp writer of all time. So he's in Zombies, Zombies, Zombies. Okay, how long is the Zombies one? It's got to be, what, 800 pages? So, again, double columned. And a lot of these, I didn't show you in the other volumes, but with the Penzler anthologies, usually you have old pulp illustrations at the head of the anthologies, or at the head of the stories. So That's really cool. So zombies, zombies, zombies. That's a lot of big-ass anthologies. But wait, there's one other thing. Actually, two other things. Because we don't want to forget about the greatest form of literature ever, which is comic books. We don't want to forget about comic books. So I do have a couple gigantic comic book anthologies that I want to get to. Now, I read a lot of the material in these anthologies before, but I've never read the whole thing. And the first one I'm going to be talking about is Marvel Horror. Marvel Horror. Now, Marvel in the 70s and into the early 80s did a lot of horror. Tomb of Dracula is the standout. But they did a lot of other horror. Right now, Steve Donahue's screaming. But they did a lot of other great horror comic books as well. Werewolf by Night, The Monster of Frankenstein, and I guess Morbius could be included, and I guess Man-Wolf can be included as well. And like those were the main horror comics. But Marvel did a lot of other horror comics, and pretty much every other scrap that they did for horror is in the anthologies I'm going to show you. This is Marvel Horror, which has the zombie, the living mummy, Brother Voodoo, It, the living colossus, the golem, Gabriel, the devil hunter, the scarecrow, and Modred the mystic, which, you know, didn't seem that horrifying, but it's in here. So this is an omnibus, a Marvel omnibus. They make these gigantic monster, appropriately enough, collections of their comics. And like this is Brother Voodoo there. Brother Voodoo was awesome. He was awesome. And all of Brother Voodoo's adventures are included in here. Because there was a lot of horror, including Tales from the Zombie. And all of the Tales from the Zombie stories are in this omnibus. This omnibus is huge. And Tales from the Zombie had some really cheesy zombie stories. You follow the adventures of one zombie. And the artwork usually was dynamite, and the stories were just strange and hilarious and cool. And this has all of the Tales from the Zombie stories in it, as well as so much more. Like I said, there's Modred the Mystic. Modred. If you've never heard of Modred, there's probably a reason. But Marvel Horror, and this is huge. This is 1,300 pages. 1,300 pages of Marvel Horror. But I know what you're saying. You're saying to yourself, 1,300 pages of Marvel comic book horror? That's not enough. You need more. You need more Marvel Horror. Okay. Marvel Horror Lives Again. Marvel Horror Lives Again. Featuring Blade. You know Blade. They made movies about Blade. He fought Dracula. Blade the Vampire Slayer. Satana, the Devil's Daughter. Lilith, spawn of Dracula. Lilith was Dracula's daughter. Ulysses Bloodstone, Monster Hunter's in here. The Manphibian. I think the Manphibian was only in one story, but it's in here. John Kowalski, Agent of Death. Hodiah Twist, Investigator of the Unknown, and the Flesh-Eating Wendigo. They were really stretching things when they put the Wendigo, who fought the Hulk, into this volume, but I guess they wanted to cover everything, and I think they did. I mean, everything that wasn't in a main horror story or horror line of comics is in here. Oh, speak of the devil. There's the Wendigo. I'm the Wendigo. I'm going to fight the Hulk. Look how terrifying he is. I know you're not going to be able to sleep at night now because you saw the Wendigo. This is full of cool stuff. I mean, a lot of the old black and white Marvel magazine stories are in this volume. It's just awesome. So much cool stuff. A lot of black and white material is in here because a lot of the horror that Marvel published was in the black and white horror magazines, and they had quite a bit of it. But we also got some other stuff, like Dracula does make an appearance because this is a story about his daughter, Lilith. Dracula, of course, has his own volumes, so, you know, this is all the other stuff, including his daughter Lilith. But we also have, like, weird appearances of horror characters that just show up in, like, the X-Men, for example, or the Avengers, or in other odd places. So, like, yeah, there's an Avengers story right there. So, yeah, these two guys, they've got all the Marvel horror stuff that wasn't part of the main Marvel horror line. And I had to include these on the shelf over there. My shelf is probably going to break and fall apart now because these things are so heavy. But what do you do? What do you do? Gotta include those. I'll shut up now because I've been talking for a long time. Okay, guys. I will catch you next time.